1960s, a decade composed of the Civil Rights Movement, assassinations, Lyndon B. Johnson, the Vietnam War, hippies, bell-bottoms, the British invasion, anti-war movements, and just the start of modern-day technology. Today we have an LGBT movement, the Iraq War, Barack Obama, diverse ways of dressing, women taking charge, high gas prices, and better technology than people of the 60s could even dream of.
I have a dream.
The 1960s was an iconic decade for civil rights. It was the start of a new integrated America. Our country has grown a lot since then. We even have an African American president. Although we are not fighting for the rights of African Americans anymore, we are fighting a civil rights movement of its own. The lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender movement is the rights we are fighting for today. The beginning of the fight for gay rights happened in the 1960s after the first civil rights movement. Now there are protests every day and fights for the right as a citizen to be able to marry any person someone wants to. During the 1960s, the Vietnam War was going on. The United States just got out of the Iraq War on Terror. Both of the wars striked up anti-war protests. The Iraq War was declared by President Bush, while the Vietnam War was never declared. The music in the 60s was very Motown and funk rock, while today's music is much more diverse, although there are set musics as to what's popular. In the 60s, they had the British invasion, which happened when the Beatles, a popular rock group, came to the United States. A lot of the music back in the 1960s was about anti-war, poverty, or important world problems, while today the music is much more personal level. Furthermore, technology has also changed the way music is created today, making music very different compared to the 60s. Fashion has changed considerably since the 1960s, but some of the fashion is still around today, such as miniskirts, which was introduced in the 60s. Girls in the 60s wore go-go boots in fluorescent colors, which are still used in fashion today. Boys wore long hair and flare jeans. The rights of women and the way they are viewed have changed drastically in the 5 decades since the 60s. Women's rights protests peaked up in the 1960s due to civil rights movement, while now women have many more rights than around that time. Women in the 60s were expected to be housewives and not create a career for themselves. Back in the 60s, it was frowned upon for women to work, but now there are women working everywhere, many even in Congress. Technology since the 1960s has also risen incredibly. In the 60s, they had just started making color TVs and early computers. In the 60s, it was rare to have items such as televisions in your house, while now it's rare to not have more than one TV within a household. Today, we are booming with new technology, smartphones, high-tech computers, video game consoles. Back in the 60s, teenagers had to read books, while now they play video games. The 60s compared to today are pretty different. We've grown so much farther in terms of civil rights of people in the United States. There's no more segregation, and now we even have a colored president, or woman working what in the 60s would be considered a man's job. The technology has grown considerably. Our films are now in color, and our music more diverse. The United States and the world has changed a lot since the 1960s.